enabling the voids, infrastructure for the old city market of Mumbai. This thesis began with my fascination for understanding the transient nature of spaces and people, of architecture. In my view, architecture has a very dual nature of existence. One that is permanent and fixed, and other that revolves around the permanent, the dynamic. Mumbai, being a metropolitan city, is full of urbanscapes with such dual nature of existence. In an urbanscape, I identify the built masses as solids and everything in between them as voids. For example, in a marketscape, buildings and infrastructure become the solids, and streets, spaces in between the buildings, leftover spaces, become the voids. There are multiple elements that exist in both the solids and voids. Some are permanent while many are temporary. For example, in a market, shops within buildings are permanent and exist for longer periods of time, but those on the street are temporary for shorter duration. Similarly, there are many other such elements. However, if one analyzes the current state of development, only the permanent solids are catered to, leading to a complete erasure of everything in between them. This leads to a loss of dynamic character of spaces. My thesis inquires whether there could be a better approach to development in such a scenario. It attempts to establish a symbiotic relationship between the solids and voids, the permanent and temporary, by intervening through the medium of architecture. To study further and for the purpose of research into this discourse, I chose one of the most prominent and dense urbanscape of Mumbai, its old city market. It includes all the factors of duality from the kind of spaces that exist in it to all the various players and networks that are involved. A constantly changing role of permanency and temporality is observed in markets. Within the old site, I looked at the Abdul Rahman Street in particular. With the Crawford Market at one junction and CST and JJ flyover in its vicinity, this street is extremely active through the day and changes with progressing time. It also gives the opportunity to deal with varying typology of the solids. Catering mostly to the needs of everyday, Abdul Rahman Street receives a high footfall, including varied user groups. To study the street, it was divided into various zones or conditions, taking into consideration several changing factors like the street widths, typology of shops, user density, etc. This gave an insight into the relationship between the built and open, the solids and voids, and the movements of various users and networks of the street. Other than the street, a macro study at the block level was made. Being the older part of the city, a building condition study was done, followed by building use and conditions of traffic and parking on site. Another important aspect was to study the regulation and policy of development in this region. The regulations relevant to the region in today's time are the 33.7 and 33.9 of the DCR. Owing to the high cost of the plots currently in the region, a block development by an individual owner is nearly impossible. Thus, a self-block development by amalgamating two or more plots is imagined as the way towards development, which falls under the DCR 33.7. Therefore, the inferences made from the site study include certain considerations and provisions to make and possible alternatives. Along with building conditions and built open ratio, a strategic choice of materials of construction becomes important owing to the density of fabric and scale of intervention sites. Provision of public facilities and parking spaces are currently way below its required numbers and must be attempted to be provided for. Other possible alternatives could be segregating the vehicular and pedestrian movements to control and regulate densities and incorporate dynamic elements in the upcoming developments to synchronize with the existing energies in site. As mentioned before, a development in this region would be possible only by amalgamating plots or an entire block development. This is so due to the smaller plots and closely packed existing built spaces. Thus, a phasing of the block adjacent to Abdul Rahman Street is developed based on the analysis of building conditions. Plots with buildings in the worst condition are amalgamated first and go under development phase 1, followed by the better ones. While doing so, the plots with buildings of religious and social significance are kept intact. This diagram shows the buildings that are kept intact. This one being a mosque, a Jamaat Khana, and a building of heritage significance. These plots are amalgamated and go under development in phase 1. All these plots, or most of these plots, have buildings that are in the worst and dilapidated condition. This is the amalgamation of plots that go under development in phase 2 and the buildings in the best condition that go under development in phase 3. A diagram showing the phase-wise development of the block where the blue is phase 1, phase 2, and this one becomes the phase 3. Post-plot amalgamation, a new block master plan is imagined. The purpose of this master plan is to redistribute the volumes and densities over the entire block and create larger open spaces, pedestrian-friendly routes within. The master plan was evolved by following a few steps. Step 1. Amalgamate plots within the block on the basis of building conditions, as explained in the previous slide. Step 2 would be to identify the individual plots that have consumed higher FSI. The higher FSI by individual plots is evenly distributed over the amalgamated plots. As seen here, the higher FSI from this plot would be distributed to this one. Step 4. The plots with poor condition buildings used for providing larger open spaces for the block. A larger central open space and corners of the block are to be left open as spaces for light, ventilation, and dispersion of densities at the corners, respectively. Post which, smaller open spaces can be designed and developed into the amalgamated plots. Further, sailed spaces can be added at a later stage. Of the amalgamated plots from phase 1, the cornermost plot at the junction of the two streets, Abdul Rahman Street and the Sheikh Memon, is taken up as the site for intervention. The two junctions adjacent to the site are heavily dense and full of varied activities. The strategies adopted for designing include releasing the two densemost junctions into the building and creating dispersion pockets at the corners of the plot, creating a larger open space or void within the plot, allowing the street to penetrate into the intervention. To the right are the intervention programs. The intervention programs include public programs that provide facilities that lack on site, like public toilet, drinking water station, adapt pockets, adaptable plinths and terraces for the temporal characters of the market, washing and cleaning spaces. Other than that, it includes the existing programs which will be accommodated back onto the site. These are the process models of both the block master plan iterations and intervention massing. The block master plan iteration shows the volumes that are tried over the block. Intervention massing was an experiment in trying different levels that connect to the street on site. Working with multiple levels and making the transition of movement from the street into the building seamless was one of the major parameters that governed the design. As seen in the plan, the parts of the plan in direct adjacence to the street are kept free from mass and very permeable in nature. The mass is pushed mainly inwards. A large central open space allows for breathability that the site demands. Another idea that is strongly reflected in the design is that of meandering. As one moves along the streets of the old city market, it's less of a directed walk and more of a meander around the spaces of the market. An attempt to keep that experience of meandering intact is made by introducing multiple staircases and levels in the central space. On the level above, public functions like the Bhojnalay, a large expandable space for setting up temporary shops and eateries outside it, are accessed directly from the Abdul Rahman Street. It almost becomes like an extended street at the level above. As one goes higher, the levels become more wholesale oriented, inviting lesser user groups and a limited number of visitors. Smaller pockets of spaces for resting, loitering are given on the higher levels. This idea is driven by the lack of spaces of rest, play, and pause in the fabric. Section AA, cuts perpendicular to both the streets, clearly depicts the transition of movement from the street to the insides of the intervention. From the Sheikh Memon Street, one dips down into the central open space, whereas from the Abdul Rahman Street, one is taken to the elevated upper level. Section BB shows the central open space and its relationship to the masses on either sides. This space is imagined to be the dispersion pocket of densities on the site and also a space of pause in the constantly buzzing market fabric. The elevation of the intervention. I shall further explain and elaborate the elevation in later slides. Given the multiple user groups, various access corridors have been designed keeping in mind the changing needs of each. A visitor would access the building from the two connections of the street, moving to higher levels. Ramps are provided for the ease of access for Hadgadiwalas, Cyclewalas, Trolleywalas, and more such players of the market. These ramps are accompanied by parking and resting spaces for these users. A parking space for vehicles is provided in the basements, and separate lifts for passengers and goods are provided. The connection to the street open up into the central open space. This central open space is also used to provide all the public facilities like the public toilet, water, drinking water stations, cleaning, washing areas, etc. This was regarding all the fixed permanent components of the intervention. However, for a fabric that is so temporal in nature, it becomes essential to introduce elements that allow for these temporalities to exist even post-development. Thus, three dynamic elements are incorporated to enable the movements within the voids of the fabric: the roof, the door system, and the skin. These elements enable one to keep the dynamic nature of the fabric intact and to allow the space to continue to be adaptable. The roof. The roof of the central open space is a retractable suspended roof that can be permutated according to the varying needs of the central space. For example, during a regular setup of vendors on the plinth, the roof may be kept all closed to provide shade, but it can be kept semi-open in the late noons to allow just adequate sunlight. The details of the roof are as shown in the drawings. The door system. The door system in the entire intervention is imagined to be the element of space making. Sliding folding timber doors in front of the shops are imagined to recreate a similar retail shop front as that which exists currently along the streets. These doors can be fixed in multiple positions to cater to the needs of space required to set up a small stall just outside the main shop by the users. Voids of changing character are created and recreated every day using this element. The details of the sliding folding timber doors. The skin system. An attempt is made to recreate the nature of current elevations of the street through this skin system. A skin within metal framing, pivoted panels, and vacant spaces in the frame for fixing shop name boards and hanging objects of sale is incorporated. Such a skin enables to maintain the existing character of the market. This is a part elevation of the skin system, and alongside is the part wall section showing the details of the elevation. One can see the shop name boards, the space to hang objects within the elevation, and all the other construction details. Further, more construction details are shown. The external skin that is attached to the slab using steel brackets and other steel members. A raised threshold to prevent rainwater from entering into the interiors of the shop. Again, vacant spaces left for attaching shop name boards and hanging sale objects. the detail of the roof system, a raised threshold that prevents rainwater from entering into the interior. A raised threshold is given both on the exterior as well as on the interior of the intervention, and the detail of the sliding folding door. An exploded axonometric showing the elements of the building, the external skin system, the sliding folding timber doors, the semi-exposed timber staircase, the central space, and the construction details. A part section showing elements of the building, retractable roof, details of the roof, panel walling system where one sees the awning window in timber, the sliding folding doors in timber, and the central open space. The basement systems and the various diagrams of the basement system, the layout which clearly marks out the parking, the loading unloading area from where the goods are taken on the upper floors, from the goods lifts, the ventilation within the basement. Now the ventilation within the basement is given through louvers, which are made by taking advantage of the varied levels of the central space. The fire safety diagrams and the drainage layout. Views of the building. This one is towards the semi-exposed timber staircase from the left wing. This is a view of the passageway along the skin, clearly showing the vacant spaces left in the frameworks to hang objects and shop name boards. View from the timber staircase, the semi-exposed timber staircase looking at the left wing. View from the Sheikh Memon Street. This clearly shows the smooth transition of the street into the central open space. The varied levels of the plinth which are used for setting up temporary shops and vendors as sale spaces. Smaller pockets of seating and resting. This is the view from the Abdul Rahman Street. Again, a smooth transition to the upper level, almost as an elevated upper street. The view of the entire intervention. Thank you.